Hey, hey, you know what time it is. Woo! Get into it! Get into it! Yes! We're back! Hi! How's it going? Children, the word of today, not to say that I'll make this like a permanent segment, but I was just thinking to myself, the word of the day is perseverance. Perseverance is the word of the day. What does that mean? Perseverance describes a person or a situation or a person, place, or thing in which continues to strive to complete a goal or a task in spite of difficulty. You could use to persevere, which is to continue to fight on or continue to try to complete a project or a situation or remedy a situation. The reason why I bring that up, and I'm just gonna tell you this now, I'm a huge comic book fan. That also includes Japanese manga, which is Japanese comics, and then manhwa, which is Korean comics. And I've actually not, I know they do exist. I've never read a Chinese comic, which I need to get on that. But I've read Tibetan comics and Korean comics and Japanese manga. And Marvel, DC, Dark Star, Image Comics, Vertigo, which is now DC Black Label. But anyway, I say all that because the way that I learned about perseverance is through the stories of Superman, Batman, Nightwing, Teen Titans, Young Justice, X-Men, New X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, X-Force, Alpha Flight, Excalibur, yes, Excalibur, which is a very underrated X-Men team, Spider-Man, Daredevil, Moon Knight, The Savage Avengers, that's also a really good series. That's a bit newer. Secret Avengers, New Avengers, not the main title, Avengers. I'm not a fan of that. But the reason why I bring up all these titles is because the stories in these comics and the stories they're in, they always teach about perseverance. And even when bad situations happen to our main characters, they still strive to complete the task. They still strive to make the world a better place. They still strive to fight in spite of difficulty, in spite of the insurmountable odds that they may be facing. And what I want to say is that kids, if you ever feel like you can't do it or that it's too tough, look to the things that inspire you. Characters, books, comics, anime, manga, TV shows, cartoons, whatever it could be for you, the individual, for you, the young person, for you, the adult. What is in your life that inspires you to persevere or to have perseverance in dark situations? And Taran and Ilanwi and Fluter and Gurgi and Lion and Dolly, they've had to learn a lot about perseverance in the midst of this war between Arorn and the people of Prydain. In the previous chapter, King Predri of the Western Domain has been killed because he tried to get the jump on Dalbin, and he forgot that Dalbin is an incredibly powerful enchanter. He is not to be messed with, and he ended up being burned alive because of his hubris. What is hubris? Hubris is having arrogance against higher level things. So like hubris is being full of like arrogance to think that everything that you do has been on your own. It's not always the case. Everybody has had a helping hand in life. Everybody has had somebody in their corner to motivate them to be self-sufficient. So nothing of what we do is completely on our own. Just saying. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I always say you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max relaxing, chillaxing time, me time, in between time, scheme time, study time, break time, CP time, any time that you want to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories of magic, adventure, science fiction, and many, many more in between. Now, this is something I have thought about. There are novelizations of specific comic book stories from DC and Marvel, from Dark Star and, Dark Horse, sorry. Shout outs to Dark Star Bookstore. But Dark Horse and Image Comics. And I've been curious for a while as to whether or not you all would be interested if I were to read a novelization of a comic book story. They're like growing up, and even now, there's still plenty of Spider-Man novelizations that immediately come to mind. There are novelizations of X-Men stories and Justice League stories and Batman stories and Superman stories. So if you are interested in that, please comment below, message me, give me suggestions. I would love to do that. That's more so going to be for my teenagers, because those stories could get a bit more mature in themes and storytelling. So those will be more so for my teenagers and my adults. But I want to know if you're interested. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And no, I don't own the music that you are listening to in the background, which is brought to you by Mr. Ambiance. Please check them out on their YouTube channel. Like, share, subscribe. And if you have not already done so, like, share, subscribe onto my YouTube channel with Storytime with Chris. It doesn't take nothing but 3 seconds, maybe less than that. Maybe 3.5 milliseconds it would take to subscribe and hit that like bell so you could get notified on any new videos that pop up, which there will be new videos later on this week. All right. Chapter 17, The Snowstorm. The fair folk warriors, all save Dolia, turned back at the line of treeless crags marking the westernmost edge of the hills of Bradgalid. Far beyond that point, the land lay under the sway of Auror Deathlord. For some days now, the companions had toiled painfully through a wilderness of stone, where not even moss or lichen flourished. The sky was gray, and the few thin clouds no more than shreds of darker gray. It was as though an evil mist had seeped from the stronghold of Anuvan, stifling all living things and leaving only this rocky waste. The companions spoke little, husbanding their strength. From the first day within the borders of the land of death, they had been obliged to dismount and go on foot, leading the weary horses through the treacherous paces. Even the stallion Melilas showed signs of fatigue. The steed's powerful neck drooped and his gait sometimes faltered. Lion, however, padded skillfully along the narrowest and most dangerous of ledges, often while the companions labored down one sharp descent to clamber up an even sharper slope. The enormous cat leapt from one crag to the next, and they would come upon her sitting with her tail coiled about her haunches, waiting for Fluter to scratch her ears, after which she would bound off once more. Dolly, firmly gripping his staff, his white hood pulled well down over his face, trudged at the end of the little band. Taran had never ceased to wonder at the tireless dwarf who found, as though by secret sense, hidden footpaths and narrow ways that helped speed the harsh journey. Yet after a time, Dolly's pace seemed to flag. Taran saw with growing concern and uneasiness that from time to time the dwarf would lose his footing and his step turned suddenly unsure. When Dolly staggered and dropped to one knee, Taran ran to his side, alarmed, and tried to lift up the dwarf. The companions hurried to join him. Dolly's usually ruddy face had grown malted, and he breathed only in painful gasps. He struggled to regain his feet.
"Curse this evil realm," he muttered. "Can't stand it as well as I thought. Don't gawk. Give me a hand up."
Stubbornly, the dwarf refused to mount one of the horses, insisting he felt better when his feet were on the ground. When Taran urged him to rest, Dolly angrily shook his head.
"I said I'd find a passage for you," he snapped, "and I mean to. Can't stand a botched job. When the fair folk set about a task, they do it right, and don't dawdle over it."
Nevertheless, after a short while, Dolly reluctantly consented to climb astride Melilas. He fumbled with the stirrups, but grumbled irritably when Fluter helped him into the saddle. Even this relief was not long-lasting. The dwarf's head soon dropped weakly forward. He swayed unsteadily, and before Taran could reach him, lurched from the stallion's back and pitched to the ground. Taran quickly signaled a halt. "We'll go no further today," he told the dwarf. "By morning you'll have your strength again." Dolly shook his head. His face was white. His crimson eyes had turned dull.
"No use waiting," he gasped. "I've been too long here. It will grow worse. Must keep on while I can still guide you."
Not at the cost of your life, Taran said. Heaven the smith will ride with you to the border. Lasar, son of Durdwas, will help the rest of us find our way.
Won't do, muttered the dwarf. Take too long without fair folk's skill. Tie me to the saddle, he commanded.
He strove to raise himself from the ground, but fell back and lay motionless. His breathing grew rasping and violent. Taran cried out in alarm. He's dying! Hurry, Fluter, help me put him on Lion. She's the swiftest mount. Ride back with him. There may still be time.
Leave me here, Dolly gasped. You can't spare Fluter. His sword is worth 10, or 6 at least. Go, quickly.
That will not do, replied Taran.
Fool!
Choked the dwarf.
Heed me, he commanded. It must be done. Are you a war leader or an assistant pig keeper?
Taran knelt by the dwarf, whose eyes were half closed, and gently put a hand on Dolly's shoulder. Need you ask, old friend? I'm an assistant pig keeper. Taran rose to meet the bard, who had hastened up to the Lion, but when he turned back to the dwarf, the ground was empty. Dolly had vanished. Where's he gone? Shouted Fluter. An irritable voice came from somewhere near a boulder.
Here, where else do you think?
Dolly, cried Taran, you were close to your death, and now...
I've turned invisible, as any clodpole with half an ounce of sense can plainly see, snorted Dolly. Should have thought of it before. Last time in Anuvan, I was visible most of the way. Never realized how it protected me.
Can it serve you now? Asked Taran, still a little bewildered. Dare you keep on?
Of course, the dwarf retorted. I'm better already, but I'll have to stay invisible as long as I can stand it, that is. Invisible. Hornets and wasps in my ears.
Good old Dolly, Taran cried, seeking vainly to pump the dwarf's unseen hand. He's like trying to shake his hand, but he can't really see because he's invisible.
Not that again, snapped the dwarf. I'm not do this willingly. Oh, my ears for any mortal in Prydain. Oh, my head, but you. And don't shout. My ears won't stand it.
Dolly's staff, which had dropped to the ground, seemed to rise of itself as the invisible dwarf picked it up. From the motion of the staff, Taran could see that Dolly had once more began trudging ahead. Guiding themselves by the length of wood, the companions followed. Yet even without sight of the staff, they could have found their way, led by the sound of loud and furious grumbling. Hold on 1 second, y'all. Oh, I don't know that number. We'll just wait to that. There we go. Honey, I do not answer phone calls that I don't recognize. Be very vigilant, children. You don't answer calls you don't know, and if it's important, they'll leave a voicemail. You don't answer the door for somebody you don't know. If they were somebody you know, they would call or text beforehand. It's important. Be very vigilant.
Like Batman.
Well,
I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
Okay. Shout outs to Kevin Conroy. May he rest in peace. I had to do it. I said vigilant, vigilante, world's greatest detective, the Dark Knight, the Caped Crusader. Okay. Ooh, that might be an idea. We could read a Batman story on here. That'd be cool. That'd be fun. We can do that. We can do that for the fall time. Not October, but around the fall time. Yeah. Fluter was first to sight the Gwithates. In the distance above a shallow ravine, 3 black-winged shapes soared and circled. What have they found? The bard cried. Whatever it is, I hope we're not the ones to be found next. Taran sounded his horn and signaled the warband to find whatever protection they could among the huge boulders. Eilonwy, disregarding Taran's order, scrambled to the top of a high jutting stone and shaded her eyes.
I can't tell for sure, Eilonwy said, but it looks to me as though they've cornered something. Poor creature, it will not last long against them.
Gurgi crouched fearfully against a rock and tried to make himself as flat as a fish.
No, Gurgi. If they see him, he wailed, they will seize his poor tender head with gashings and slashings.
Pass on! Pass on! Glue shouted, his little face puckered in fright. They're busy with their prey. Don't stop here like fools. Get as far away as we can. Oh, if I were a giant again, you'd not find me lingering. The Gwithates narrowed their circle and had begun to swoop downward, seeking their kill. But suddenly, what appeared to be a black cloud with a dark shape leading it streaked down from the eastern quarter of the sky. Before the surprised companions could follow its swift movement overhead, the cloud shattered as if at its leader's command into winged fragments that drove straight upon the huge birds. Even at this distance, Taran could hear the furious screams of the Gwithates as they veered aloft to face these strange assailants. Fluter had leapt up beside Eilunwe as Taran and Dolly clambered to a vantage point. The bard shouted excitedly, "Crows! Great Beeland! I've never seen so many!" Like great black hornets, the crows swarmed over their enemy. It was not a single combat of bird against bird, but a battle in which whole troops of crows grappled and clung to the Gwithates' lashing wings, heedless of sharp beaks and talons, forcing the creatures earthward. When, by sheer strength, the Gwithates shook off their attackers, a new troop would form and renew the charge. The Gwithates sought to break free of their burden by plunging downward, scraping as closely as they dared against the sharp stones. But as they did, the crows pecked furiously at them, and the Gwithates spun and fluttered dizzily, losing their course and falling once again victim to the relentless assault. In a last burst of power, the Gwithates beat their way aloft. They turned and sped desperately northward, and with the crows in hot pursuit, they vanished over the horizon, all save a solitary crow that flew swiftly toward the companions. Do you want to guess who this crow is? Caw! Taran shouted and held out his arms. Jabbering at the top of his voice, the crow swooped down. His eyes glittered in triumph, and he flapped his shining wings more proudly than a rooster. He gabbled, croaked, squawked, and poured forth such a torrent of yammering that Gurgi clapped his hands over his ears. From his perch on Taran's wrist, Ka bobbed his head and clacked his beak, thoroughly delighted with himself and never for a moment ceasing his chatter. Taran, trying vainly to interrupt the crow's raucous and boastful clamor, had despaired of learning any tidings from the roguish bird when Ka flapped his wings and sought to fly off again. "Akrin!" Ka croaked. "Akrin, queen!" "You've seen her?" Taran caught his breath. He had given little thought to the once powerful queen since her flight from Caer Dallben. "Where is she?" The crow fluttered a little distance away, then returned, his beating wings urging Taran to follow him. "Close! Close! Gwithates! Gwithates!"
Eilunwe gasped. "That's what we saw! The Gwithates have slain her!"
"Alive!" Ka answered. "Hurt!" Taran ordered the Kamot horsemen to await him, then leapt to the ground to follow after Ka. Eilunwe, Dolly, and Gurgi hastened to join him. Glue refused to budge, remarking that he had already skinned himself on enough rocks and had no intention of going out of his way for anyone. Fluter hesitated a moment. "Yes, well, I suppose I shall get along too, should you need help in carrying her, but it doesn't sit well with me. Akrin was eager enough to go her own way, and I'd rather think we shouldn't meddle. Not that I fear her, not for a moment. The truth is," he hurriedly added as the harp strings tensed, "the woman makes me shudder. Since the day she threw me into a dungeon, I've noticed something unfriendly about her. She has no fondness for music. I can tell you, nevertheless," he cried, "a flam to the rescue!" Like a tattered bundle of black rags, the still form of Queen Akren lay in the fissure of a massive rock where she had, in her last hope, pressed to escape the Gwithates' vicious beaks and talons. Yet her refuge, Taran saw pityingly, had offered the queen scant protection. Akren moaned faintly as the companions carefully lifted her from the crevice. Lion, who had followed along with the bard, crouched silently nearby and lashed her tail uneasily. Akren's face, drawn and deathly pale, had been badly slashed, and her arms bore many deep and bleeding wounds. Eilunwe held the woman and tried to revive her. "Lion shall carry her back with us," Taran said. "She will need more healing herbs than I have brought. More than her wounds, her fever has weakened her. She has gone long without food or drink."
"Her shoes are in ribbons," Eilunwe said. "How far must she have wandered in this awful place? Poor Akren. I can't say I'm fond of her, but it makes my toes curl up just imagining what could have happened."
Fluter, after helping move the unconscious queen to more level ground, had stayed a few paces away. Gurgi, too, chose to keep some distance between Akren and himself. Nevertheless, at Taran's bidding, they drew closer, and the bard, with many soothing words, held Lion steady, while the other companions lifted Akren to the great cat's back.
Hurry along, called the voice of Dolly. It's starting to snow.
White flakes had begun drifting from the heavy sky, which is kind of ironic today in Ohio, considering that in Yellow Springs, I saw snow sprinkles today, and it's 33 degrees outside. It's Ohio, the land of 4 seasons. I'm not surprised, and yet I am surprised. White flakes had begun drifting from the heavy sky. Within little time, a biting wind swirled around the companions, and snow drove against them in an ever-thickening cloud. Needles of ice stung their faces. It grew more and more difficult to see, and as the storm gained in fury, even Dolly could no longer be sure of the path. The companions staggered blindly in a file, each clutching the other, with Taran gripping an end of Dolly's staff. Caw, almost entirely covered with snow, hunched up his wings and tried desperately to keep his perch on Taran's shoulder. Lion, burdened with the motionless queen, bent her great head against the gale and plodded onward, but the sure-footed cat often stumbled over hidden boulders and snow-filled pits. Once Gurgi yelled in terror and vanished, as suddenly as if the earth had swallowed him. He had tumbled into a deep crevice, and by the time the companions were able to haul him out, the hapless creature nearly turned into a shaggy icicle. He trembled so violently he could scarcely walk, and between them Taran and Fluter bore him along. The wind did not slacken, the snow fell in an impenetrable curtain, and the cold, already bitter, grew even more intense. Breathing was painful with such labored gasps. Taran felt the frigid draft like daggers in his lungs. Eilonwy half sobbed with cold and exhaustion, and she clung to Taran, striving to keep her footing as Dolly led them through drifts that now had risen more than knee-high.
We can't go on, the dwarf shouted above the wind. Find shelter! Make our way to the horsemen when the snow lets up.
But the warriors, how should they fare? Taran replied anxiously.
Better than we, the dwarf cried. Where they are, that's a good-sized cave I noticed along the cliff wall. Your young shepherd is bound to find it, never fear. Our trouble is finding something ourselves.
However, even after long and painful searching, the dwarf discovered nothing more than a shallow gully below an overhanging ledge. The companions stumbled gratefully into it. Here they were protected against the worst battering of the wind and snow, but the cold still gripped them, and no sooner had they halted than their bodies seemed to stiffen, and they moved arms and legs only with the greatest difficulty. They clung together for warmth and pressed against Lion's thick coat of fur. Even this gave them little comfort, for as night fell, the chill deepened. Taran stripped off his cloak and covered Eilonwy and Akren. Gurgi insisted on adding his sheepskin jacket, and he crouched with his shaggy arms wrapped around himself, his teeth chattering loudly. I fear that Akren will not live the night, Taran murmured to Fluter. She was too close to death when we found her. She will not have strength to stand such cold. Will any of us? Answered the bard. Without a fire, we might just as well say farewell to each other right now.
I don't know what you're complaining about, Eilonwy sighed. I've never been so comfortable in all my life.
Taran looked at her in alarm. The girl did not stir under the cloak. Her eyes were half shut. Her voice faltered with drowsiness.
Quite warm, she rambled on happily. What a lovely goose-feather quilt I have. How odd. I dreamed we were all caught in a terrible storm. It wasn't pleasant at all. Or am I still dreaming? No matter. When I wake up, it will all be gone away.
Taran, his face drawn with anxiety, shook her roughly. Don't sleep, he cried. If you sleep, it will be your death. Eilonwy did not answer him, but only turned her head away and closed her eyes. Gurgi had curled up beside her and could not be roused. Taran himself felt a fatal drowsiness spreading over him. Fire, he said. We must build a fire.
From what? Dolly brusquely replied. There's not a twig to be found in this wilderness. What will you burn? Our boots, our cloaks, will freeze all the faster.
It's making me look at this cover. He flickered back into sight.
And if I'm gonna freeze, I won't do it with hornets buzzing in my ears.
Fluter, who had been silent this while, reached behind him and unslung his harp.
At this, Dolly gave a furious shout. "Harp music!" he cried. "My friend, your wits are frozen solid as ice." "It shall give us the tune we need," replied Fluter. Taran dragged himself to the side of the bard. "Fluter, what do you mean to do?" The bard did not answer. For a long moment he held the harp lovingly in his hands and gently touched the strings. Then, with a quick motion, raised the beautiful instrument and smashed it across his knee. Taran cried out in anguish as the wood shattered into splinters and the harp strings tore loose with a discordant burst of sound. Fluter let the broken fragments drop from his hands. "Burn it," he said. "It is wood well seasoned." Taran seized the bard by the shoulders. "What have you done?" he sobbed. "Gallant, foolish Flam, you've destroyed your harp for the sake of a moment's warmth? We need a greater fire than this wood can ever give us." Dolly, however, had quickly taken flint from his pouch and struck a spark into the pitiful heap of splinters. Instantly the wood blazed up and sudden warmth poured over the companions. Taran stared, amazed at the rising flames. The bits of wood seemed hardly to be consumed, yet the fire burned all the more brightly. Gurgi stirred and raised his head. His teeth had ceased their chattering, and color was returning to his frost-pinched face. Eilonwy, too, sat up and looked about her as though waking from a dream. At a glance she understood what fuel the bard had offered, and tears sprang into her eyes. "Don't give it a second thought," cried Fluter. "The truth of the matter is that I'm delighted to be rid of it. I could never really play the thing. It was more of a burden than anything else. Great Beelern, I feel light as a feather without it. Believe me, I was never meant to be a bard in the first place, so all is for the best." In the depths of the flame, several harp strings split in two and a puff of sparks flew into the air. But it does give foul smoke," Fluter muttered though the fire was burning clear and brilliant. "Makes my eyes water horribly." The flames had not spread to all the fragments, and as the harp strings blazed, a melody sprang suddenly from the heart of the fire. Louder and more beautiful it grew, and the strains of music filled the air, echoing endlessly among the crags. Dying, the harp seemed to be pouring forth all the songs ever played on it, and the sound shimmered like the fire. All night the harp sang, and its melodies were of joy, sorrow, love, and valor. The fire never abated, and little by little new life and strength returned to the companions, and as the notes soared upward, a wind rose from the south, parting the falling snow like a curtain and flooding the hills with warmth. Only at dawn did the flames sink into glowing embers, and the voice of the harp fell silent. The storm had ended. The crags glistened with melting snow. Wordless and wondering, the companions left their shelter. Fluter lingered behind for a moment. Of the harp nothing remained but a single string, the one unbreakable string which Gwydion had given the bard long ago. Fluter knelt and drew it from the ashes. In the heat of the fire, the harp string had twisted and coiled around itself, but it glittered like pure gold. And that is where we will end for today. And as you can see on the cover, that's Fluter's harp. Right there. Keeping everybody warm. Pouring out its melodies into the world. And I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.